G'day guys, and today, using an example, I want to attempt to differentiate between rationalism and empiricism. Now, rationalism and empiricism are schools of thought of epistemology, with epistemology being the branch of philosophy concerned with the theory of knowledge. Now, epistemology hasn't been something so much I've gone into on the channel. I've been mostly looking at ethics, especially in regard to libertarian thought and that sort of thing. But if I'm wanting to, as I'm wanting to with this channel, spread philosophy, because I believe it's the mechanism of communication that will help solve some of our problems, well, obviously we need to start pushing one of these major branches of philosophy, the others of course being ethics and metaphysics. So epistemology is the study of the nature of knowledge. It's asking questions such as, what is truth, how do we know that we know, and what does it mean to say that we know something? So very sort of complex questions that you couldn't possibly just answer off the top of your head unless you're extremely confident, and in which case you'll probably be extremely wrong. It does bear well to point out that empiricism and rationalism are not the only schools of thought of epistemology. There are such things such as skepticism, pragmatism, idealism, and that sort of thing. And those will be something I could potentially go into at a later date, but today we'll just be dealing with empiricism and rationalism. So to give you some basic definitions to work with, empiricism is the school of thought of epistemology that says that sense perception is the chief source of knowledge. So human beings will go out in the world gaining knowledge using their senses. So we'll be seeing things, we'll be touching things, we'll be tasting things, and this is all giving us obviously feedback into the nature of these things. So we can think of if we walk into a kitchen and we see something on the stove, we see a pan on the stove. Well, using our senses, we can gain knowledge about that pan. We can see the air above it shimmering, we can sort of listen and hear things frying in the pan, we can feel the heat. If we touch the pan, it'll be really hot, and this all gives us an idea that obviously this pan is extremely hot, and that's a source of knowledge that we can use to our advantage, namely, don't touch the pot. Rationalism is a little bit different. So instead of using sense perception, rationalists say that reason is the chief source of knowledge. So rather than wandering around looking at things and touching things and tasting things and that sort of thing to gain knowledge, rationalists will use logic and by extension reason, which is the chain of logic. So there are many rationalistic techniques used to gain knowledge about the world without having to go out and actually sense it yourself. A simple example being, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So that's fairly easy to grasp, and I'll just give you an example here. So we'll have three claims. Claim number A: all old men are bald. Socrates was an old man, therefore Socrates was bald. A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Now this technique, if A equals B, B equals C, and such and so forth, is valid as long as your points are correct. So looking back to our example, we can see that this example is not correct because we're assuming that A, all old men are bald, and we know through, ironically enough, empiricism, going out and looking at other old men, that not all old men are bald. So if you want to use rationalistic techniques, you need to make sure all your individual points of logic in the chain are correct in order to be correct. However, you don't actually have to use sense of perception to see if you are correct. You don't actually have to test your thesis to know if you're correct. And there's a bit of a dichotomy between these, which I will present to you here. So we'll be having a look at a mathematical proof today, specifically the Pythagorean theorem. So for example, a rationalist will be able to say, for all right-angled triangles, a squared plus b squared will equal c squared. The empiricist can't actually say that for all right-angled triangles this is so, because he hasn't actually perceived all right-angled triangles. All he can say is, look, so far through trial and error I can confirm that this is true. But the rationalist says, look, I know this is correct for all, whereas you only know this is correct up until now. There is a difference between these two. Because you have not yet sensed every single right-angled triangle, you don't actually know that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You only know that this theorem holds true in cases you've tried, but there could be an unlimited amount of right-angled triangles that you haven't tried, so you don't actually know that's true. So that gives you a sort of an example of the limits of empiricism. But if we're wanting to be able to explain the difference between rationalism and empiricism simply to someone, give someone a basic example to show them the dichotomy, A good example I like to use is the noise upstairs example. So the example goes a little something like this. So we have to picture ourselves living in a house with 2 stories. Now within this house, obviously you live there, but also your friend lives there. And for the purpose of the example, let's call our friend Chris. Now you and Chris are both home. Your bedroom is on the bottom floor, Chris's bedroom is on the top floor. And you're sitting in your room doing whatever, watching YouTube, watching Bitchute, as you do. Suddenly, you hear a noise from upstairs. Now, we know that Chris is home, and we know that the noise came from Chris's room. So the question is, who made the noise? Well, the rationalist would be able to claim, look, using logic, obviously the noise came from Chris's room, and Chris is in the house at the moment, it bears to reason that Chris made the noise because that's his room, that's where he would be, and that sort of stuff. We don't actually have to go upstairs and check if Chris has made that noise because, we can use reason to sort of determine it. What the empiricist would say, however, is, look, that's fine, we can use the chain of logic, but we don't actually know for sure until we go and check because there are other possibilities that could reasonably occur. There could be someone breaking into the house at the moment. There could have been an animal that made the noise, something like that. We don't actually know who made the noise until we go and check. So that should give you an idea of the differences between empiricism and rationalism. We have the same piece of knowledge, a noise coming from upstairs, and then another piece of knowledge that we're trying to work towards, namely who made the noise. We can use these 2 different systems to derive different answers based on, the nuances of each discipline. The empiricist would be unable to say that he definitely knows Chris made the noise until he goes and checks, and obviously sees him and hears him, that sort of thing. The rationalist will be able to say that it is most likely, or some would say certainly Chris, because of course this is Chris's room, the noise came from Chris's room, and obviously Chris is home, so he made the noise. This example also demonstrates the limitations of each school of thought, because obviously in this example it's physically capable for us to go upstairs and check on Chris to see, hey bro, who made the noise, and that sort of thing. But as I've explained before with my Pythagorean theorem example, sometimes it's not possible to actually sense the perceptions that you're trying to garner. Obviously in the case of the Pythagorean triangle, again, we don't know what every single right angle triangle looks like. We have to, individually observe each one to determine, yes, a squared plus b squared equals c squared for all triangles. This would actually take an infinite amount of time because there are an infinite amount of right angle triangles because, you can just keep adding a micron to each end and it's a different triangle every time. So yes, I hope I was able to accurately demonstrate the differences between rationalism and empiricism in this video. If you have any thoughts and feedback, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.